It's great to be here, and wow, we got a lot to get into, I think, over the next 50 or 60 minutes. I want to let you all know we're going to open it up to you guys for some questions at the end. I am Trish Regan. I am the host of the Trish Regan Show on digital media now, because we're living in a new age. Trish Regan channel on YouTube, where I'm really proud because in the last 28 days, we just did 28 million downloads. So it's been growing like wildfire. And why this is important is because I think there's a new way for people to actually reach out and get their message across. And it's what everybody is doing here at Job Creators Network. I'm so thrilled to be here. But you guys have such a grassroots effort where you're able to, kind of get the word out to people, obviously in the traditional sense, right, with traditional media, and I've been part of that for 20 some odd years until recently. But this opportunity to kind of get out and speak to the people directly, not just door to door, but also by going onto social media, et cetera, has been really incredible. And it's enabling us, I think, all to really express the importance of the messages that are out there. Obviously, we have a lot going on right now. We're hoping to get these tax cuts extended. I'm thrilled to bring into the conversation here Grover Norquist. He's the president of Americans for Tax Reform. Representative Beth Van Duyne. She is U.S. Representative for Texas's 24th Congressional District. Jonathan Williams, he's the president and chief economist of the American Legislative Exchange Council. And Nicole Wolter, she's the president and CEO of HM Manufacturing. And, we're doing this panel amid this backdrop of course, the elephant in the room, which is the tariff stuff. My sources tell me they are very close to getting a lot of deals done, and I'm extremely hopeful that this is going to end very well for the United States of America and for small businesses in particular. But the other thing going on is the extension of these tax cuts. I got to tell you guys, I was so surprised. I was so surprised after Donald Trump was elected, and I might have been on Steve Moore's radio show, I think, and one of the guests there brought this issue up and said, I don't know if we're going to get these tax cuts through. And I'm like, whoa, you're kidding me. He was elected. Isn't that the whole idea? Because those tax cuts, I'll tell you, they were wondrous for our economy. We actually had the most growth in middle-class wages since the day of JFK. You hadn't seen anything like this. So it was a tremendous boom, and I'm just hopeful that we can do that, because I think the consequences of not having those extended would be pretty darn severe and not something that we really want, or nor that he wants, nor why he was elected. I mean, this is about making our economy as strong as it can be. So that's what we kind of want to get in today. I'll start with you, Grover, because this was amazing. I think I just mentioned the growth in income. What is it that those tax cuts were doing? How did they help America back in 2018?
Sure. When you reduce the corporate income tax and the individual income tax, money stays. Thank you.
There we go.
When you reduce the when you reduce the corporate income tax from 35%, highest in the world, stupider than France, higher than China, not where you want to be, down to 21%. He wanted 15. We were able to get to 21. When Trump had those tax cuts put through and the individual rates were cut, more money stayed in the private sector. And the business community invests the money that stays in the private sector, as do individuals. Government spends it. And then shows up next year and says, we want more. Next year, the businessman and the individual investor has created more resources than existed before. So when you cut taxes, you're moving money from the unproductive government sector to the productive private sector, and you make the country richer, and it grows, and you create jobs and all the things you're trying to get accomplished.
So what's at risk here, Representative? I mean, if they don't go through, which again, it kind of surprises me that we have to, and we can get into sort of the intricacies, because I think you're well versed in that in terms of everybody's individual needs in Congress, but what do you think the consequences are if these don't go through right now?
Well, we've been working on this, and I'll give a lot of credit to Jason Smith, who's our chairman of Ways and Means. We've been working on this for over 2.5 years. We actually were able to pass a bill last year through the House. It died in the Senate that did extend these provisions from the TCJA. What will happen is you're going to see decimation of small businesses across the country. You're going to see that the hardest hit are going to be middle-class workers. And we have been hearing about this from every district, from every industry, from every size business available. What they tell us is the exactly what you were saying, this TCJA, when it was put into place, the government, financial experts, which get it wrong all the time, absolutely got it wrong. They didn't recognize the growth that it was going to happen. And quite honestly, if COVID hadn't hit, I think you would have seen explosive growth, creating a virtuous cycle. That didn't happen only because of COVID, but what it did happen is we saw so many more onshoring of manufacturing businesses. We saw companies that were able to invest more in their employees, in their growth, and we saw a massive increase in economic growth in this country as a direct result. If we are not able to get those extensions of the TCJA provisions and others that are trying to promote manufacturing back in the United States, you're going to see 90% of all American taxpayers have the largest tax increase in our nation's history.
It's scary, especially when you combine it with, the talk of tariffs. And look, I actually think that this is going to all end well. It's painful in the interim, right, Jonathan? I mean, in terms of we don't know, there's uncertainty. But I can't even imagine what it's going to look like if you've got uncertainty still with tariffs. Hopefully we don't. Hopefully that gets resolved. And then you don't have the tax gets extended. I mean, it's just going to be, I think, a double whammy of disaster. And what is it that's going on in Congress that's preventing this? Because, hey, Republicans have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the Oval Office. I can't believe we have to even debate the fact that we may not get these things.
Well, you can thank the Senate, I think. I think the Congressman would probably agree with that. But because of the 60 vote threshold in the United States Senate, you need to depend on budget reconciliation instructions. And what's going on right now in Congress is thank you to your good work and the good work of Chairman Smith, who's an ALEC alum from when he served in the Missouri legislature. We've got some great folks that have been sitting in the cave for this to go forward. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the spending side of the ledger right now. Of course, that's what the committees are in the middle of. I think as we sit here, there's obviously some great opportunities for us to talk about how do we want government to look going forward. Spending equals taxation. At the state level where ALEC works, 49 of the 50 states have a balanced budget requirement. Wouldn't that be nice if Congress got back to something close to a balanced budget or even a budget period? But what they're doing right now, the hard work is being done and being negotiated even today and through the weekend and tomorrow and into next week when we look at one of the big issues that nobody's wanted to talk about for a long time in Washington is Medicaid. Right? Looking at what it means to actually reform that program that was supposed to be there for those that are disabled, truly needy, the elderly, and has morphed into something totally beyond that. And so I commend Congress for taking a hard look at that. That's something that's needed to be done for a very long time, and it's going to be something that potentially paves the way for incredible pro-growth reforms like the Congresswoman was talking about.
Yeah, we need it. We need it. Nicole, going over to you, you were part of this effort by Job Creators Network to make sure that we got those tax cuts back in the day, 2017. How did that help your business? Because you're a small business owner. I think it's important to hear from you on this perspective.
Yeah, so, we are a gear manufacturer, so we do a lot for aerospace defense, food processing, beverage packaging, and second generation. So it's a family business of 46 years. And in 2017, we were still in this stale manufacturing era. We weren't really adding on new equipment. We weren't really adding on to employees. And so when this came about, I was so excited because what we ended up doing was we did $750,000 worth of new capital equipment, which meant new jobs. And we took that and we had higher wages and we did bonuses and we did full healthcare paid, which is like unheard of in today's age. So none of my employees pay healthcare. We pay for all of it. And it's been so cool because we went from 12 employees to 27 since 2017, wow, which is a huge increase. And so when we're talking about what all of this does for small businesses and manufacturers, it's huge. I've got to see people be able to buy homes, new cars, be able to take their kids and go to private schooling. I mean, it's just been so great to hear all of the great things that have happened with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So what I did is I reinvested it into the employees. I now pay 100% for their training so they can go from level 1 to level 3. And I just think that those type of opportunities should be shared and they should be showcased because, we're not the big bad wolves. We take these tax cuts and we just reinvest it into our community and as well into our employees. I mean, even something as simple as paid internships for high schoolers. So I think that's really neat to be able to give back to the community, let them see what a real job is, what manufacturing is, give them a different perspective. But none of that would be possible without these opportunities from the tax cuts and jobs.
Right, which is why it's so critical. Grover, I want to get to you on this issue of government spending, because I actually once had a rather notorious debate years ago with Gene Sperling, who was working for Obama back when I was at Bloomberg. And we were having this debate about growing the size of government spending. And he was pointing out that GDP is growing this much, therefore, you have to grow spending by this much, to which I kept getting stuck on. But if I'm a family and we make more money in a given year, that doesn't mean I'm gonna run out and buy like a brand new car or upgrade my house, right? Like, why is there this direct correlation between GDP increases by this much, so therefore we have to spend by this much, not to mention we're spending at a level that's basically wartime. We haven't been doing this since wartime. You've got Democrats claiming that this bill is going to increase the deficit in order to stop it, but what are the real deficit implications I want to ask you about, and why are they so stuck on spending more?
Because you were talking to a Democrat. And there are two political parties in the United States. The modern Republican Party is the party that won't raise your taxes. The modern Democratic Party is the party that lives off your taxes. I passed out two charts at every table, and what this shows is from 1932 until the yellow line, 1994, that's 62 years. The Republicans won control of Congress twice, once under Truman, once under Eisenhower. Because we did a good job of writing a constitution that doesn't give us a king, Congress runs everything. Presidents start wars, they have scandals. But Congress decides how much to spend, how much to tax, used to decide about wars. But here you have 62 years, Republicans control Congress twice. In 1994, because Bush raised taxes, having said he wouldn't, having signed the pledge not to, he lost the presidency, and in 1994, 96% of all Republicans running in the House and the Senate signed the pledge never to raise taxes. Since 1994, out here, there have been 18 years where the Republicans had both houses and 6 years where the Democrats had both houses. We went from the Republicans being the Washington Generals, and they never got to win the basketball game, to where we win more than not and control things more than not, which is why the central key thing for the modern pro-growth, pro-private sector party needs to be never raise taxes, cut them every chance you get, never raise them, never raise them, never raise them. And for the Democrats, the answer to every problem in the world is raise taxes and increase spending. They used to be able to say, we're increasing spending, and we'll wait for the Republicans to show up afterwards and raise the taxes so we don't look irresponsible. The Republicans stopped doing that a while ago, and now the Democrats, if they want to spend more, need to raise the taxes. Republicans are saying no to tax increases, and that has led them to actually be in a position of a lot of control.
A follow-up on that, does that mean then if the tariffs go through and let's just say they get a 10% tariff on everything coming in, does that help to offset things? Is that sort of the motivation? Okay, we want to get some revenue in the door, not too onerous, right? Because you go back to the Art Laffer's curve, and at some point people aren't going to buy if the taxes become too extraordinary. But can tariffs in that sense help and maybe make some of these tax cuts more palatable?
The president's position, as he stated it, is he wants to get to where we have no tariffs and no interference with international trade, because we got rich with that. And we're a powerful country because we have the largest free trade zone in the world. And that's how we got richer than other countries. We set up the Constitution because we didn't want tariffs at every state border, which is what we had prior to the US Constitution, and then we saw tremendous growth. Tariffs, in terms of growth, are a very damaging tax, like the corporate income tax or the individual tax. Using them to negotiate with other countries, assuming we can get that done reasonably quickly, may make some sense. But long-term, they're not the way to raise resources. When we had a government that was 3% of GDP, we paid for it with tariffs. We're at 2025. So that's a different ballgame.
It is. Congresswoman, do you foresee an opportunity in this environment where we are talking tariffs and we are potentially having lower taxes, just like we did before, right? I think you mentioned the onshoring of so much activity because there was a tax incentive. I mean, back in the day during Obama, I used to call them like shotgun marriages. A big American company would go and run over and buy a company in Ireland because they would get the 12% tax rate that you could in Ireland instead of the extraordinary tax rate here. And Donald Trump came in and said, you know what? We're going to lower corporate taxes. So all you who want to come back and onshore your business here, you'll create jobs here. It's a win-win-win. Might there be an opportunity, both through these tax cuts and some of these tariff negotiations, to see more corporations say, hey, let's make stuff here?
Well, that's absolutely the goal, right? Why else would we be going through this exercise if that wasn't the goal? And if we needed more of an exclamation point, look what happened during COVID. When we found that we were not producing equipment, we were not producing pharmaceuticals that we had to have. I mean, it's a national security issue. And so I think what you've seen is this president, this administration, a number of us in Congress have identified this as a problem. But it's more complex than just tariffs good, tariffs bad. I always say this is like a Rubik's Cube, right? You push here, you pull here, you twist here, you see what the response is. This is a very long-term strategy, and why it may look chaotic. Chaos is the word that I keep hearing from the Democrats. I think it's organized chaos. They have really kind of mortarboarded what the responses are going to be. There is a goal. All of the team is on board with this goal, but what I hear from small businesses and corporations, they can play by the rules if they know what they are, but they continuously change. So yes, you've got the threat right now of tariffs and not knowing what it's going to look like tomorrow, and it keeps changing as it's going to because it's being used as a negotiation tool, and different countries are reacting differently, as you see. But right now, you've got 75 countries who are coming to the table to negotiate because they want to have better relationships and trade relationships with the U.S. But having this tax bill made definite will be a tremendous improvement. Knowing what's going to happen, not recognizing that there's a threat at the end of this year if we don't have these things, these provisions extended. And I've heard from a number of cabinet members that had the TCJA provisions been made permanent, that you would have seen an increased investment in the U.S. by private industry by over $800 billion. But you saw the foot taken off the gas because of that uncertainty. So we are trying to work as fast as we can. You brought up the question, why? Why is you've got a Republican-led House, you've got a Republican-led Senate, you've got a Republican in the White House. Why isn't this stuff happening? Well, I agree wholeheartedly that Republicans have tried to decrease taxes and aren't increasing them. It's the spend. And we do have some Republican members that are not willing to cut spending as much as others want to. So we have a very, very narrow majority, but there are some of us, and I include myself in this, who are fiscal hawks, who are looking at the threat of having $37 trillion in debt, who are looking at how much we're spending on our debt right now. Our debt spend is $1 trillion. We're spending more on our debt, on servicing our debt, than we are spending on all of defense. Countries have gone down as soon as that has happened, and we're there. So you have this fight between some of us on the same side. They're saying we have got to cut, not just trim, not just shave, but you have got to cut. The question is, where? What kind of pound of flesh are you willing to put on the table? This is where the negotiations are getting personal. This is where the negotiations have to happen. But I understand that I've got a lot of industry in my state that's coming to me and saying, we have to have these IRA provisions extended. We need to have them. They've only been around for 4 months. If your business model is dependent on government subsidies, you will have a bad, unsustainable business model. But again, these are a lot of the conversations that we're having. It's not just you've got the majority, you've got to have a majority that's willing to vote for the same bill.
So in other words, you have a lot of people in Congress with a lot of vested interest, maybe from donors, I don't know, but that are putting pressure on them to say, we need to keep this, that, and the other. So everybody's got their hand in the cookie jar. And then how do you actually bring everybody to the table to the greater thing? I mean, that's what it sounds to me like you're saying. Wow, right? Like it's disappointing. Jonathan, where do you see it going? I mean, hopefully we get it done. Where are I mean, not that we want to call out anybody in particular, but are there any like real sticking points or states that have become real sticking points?
It's such a great point, because what you outlined there is exactly right. One of my favorite economists, Thomas Sowell. Anybody a fan of Thomas Sowell?
Oh, yeah.
Out there?
Oh, yeah.
National treasure. You know, Thomas Sowell put it this way: the first law of economics is we know that we have a scarcity of resources. The first law of politics, however, is to ignore the first law of economics. And I think that you couldn't put it better than that. That's the dilemma that we face. It's the real politic of the scenario. We need more leaders like the Congresswoman who are willing to take on those sacred cows in Washington, whether it's spending or things like the state and local tax deduction, the SALT deduction. That was a huge sticking point last time. We lost a number of Republicans, but Speaker Johnson's margins are a whole lot more narrow now than they were back in 2017. And so that, for us, from an ALEC perspective, we are working with our state legislators saying, why do we have this subsidy to high tax states? Why don't we just have the rates lowered? And if people are completely within their rights to be upset about high property taxes in New York or New Jersey, or high income taxes for that matter, or high sales taxes for that matter, places like Illinois, they need to take those complaints to Albany, to Sacramento, to Springfield, and to Trenton, and not to come to Washington and ask for all of us to pick up the tab and subsidize that through the tax cut. And you look over the 10-year CBO score, and that's about $1 trillion right there in the SALT deduction. If the limits on the SALT deduction go away that were enacted in 2017, that's going to mean a whole lot more spending that we need to try to address, or it's going to mean fewer tax cuts.
Yeah, and they're talking about that.
So that is a huge issue that we need to resolve. Unfortunately, it's going to come down to a margin of 2 or 3 or 4 of folks that are going to be in SALT districts. The big thing that I noticed, though, of the top 50 congressional districts that take the SALT deduction, I think there's a grand total of 6 or 7 Republicans in that top 50. So we were talking about high income, high earners from blue states that are huge beneficiaries of that.
Nicole, what happens if it does? I mean, you're a small business owner. You're in it. You're in the trenches. What happens? You've seen the benefits of what can transpire when you have smart tax policy. What if these things expire? What do you think happens?
Well, I think it kills innovation. In manufacturing, you need to have technology. You need to innovate. We compete against the world. So if you don't have that latest and greatest technology, that new AI piece, you don't have skilled machinists, you can't keep going. I have seen so many companies in the past 2 years that are third and fourth generation that have either closed indefinitely or have sold because of the uncertainty of where manufacturing was going. They just didn't know, and they were scared to wait it out. The other thing too is I think everyone forgets what happened during COVID. It was a very terrible time for manufacturers. Yes, a lot of us were busy, but then we had a lot of surcharges, we had high inflation, high interest rates, so no one was purchasing machinery during those times because who has the cash flow to be able to have 8, 9, 10% on $1 million of equipment? It's very difficult. So if you can't get people to want to buy machinery, invest into their corporation, into their employees, into bonuses or whatever kind of incentivizes them in your community, you really don't have anything. And I think that's what's really scary in today's age is, yes, we're talking about reshoring and that is coming back, but at what rate? We do need the skilled labor. We do need that technology. And having those kind of tax breaks really, really helps small business. We're small. And every little bit really does count and it helps. And I've seen this company transform where we were a $2 million company, now we're 7. And it's really exciting to see how we've been progressing and moving. But I will say for the past 2 years, it wasn't good. It didn't look good. And now that President Trump's in office, you see a lot of the orders coming in. We're seeing a lot of quoting activity come in. And I do think that that's a big part of the tariffs. You're seeing a lot of the reshoring. They're saying, okay, we're going to bring it back. But in order to be able to bring it back, you need technology, you need machines, you need people.
Grover, there are a lot of things being talked about, and the Congresswoman mentioned sort of the individual needs of all these different states and communities. And what about Elon Musk and Doge and the efforts that they're taking to cut federal costs? Will that make a dent in anything?
Certainly, and that also opened up the hood of the car or truck and said, look at what's not working. And so there's a lot that will flow from those decisions. It is my hope, and I've talked to leadership in the House and Senate, that we get actual committees set up that do what DOGE does, so that there's an appropriations committee which comes up with new ways to spend money, and we have an unappropriations committee that recommends budget cuts. This actually existed during World War II, it's called the Byrd Committee, after Senator Byrd from Virginia, and they would recommend cuts. That's why there is no Civilian Conservation Corps anymore. They eliminated it to help pay for World War II. Or the Works Projects Administration eliminated to pay for World War II. These would be major programs today if we hadn't done that. So to institutionalize it in Congress as a regular committee, I think would be extremely helpful. But if I could suggest, we've been talking about what happens in Washington, and whatever state you're from, you go, yeah, that's Washington, I have a Bolshevik as a Democratic congressman, what can I do? This map is the 8 green states that have no income tax. And under federalism, in your own state, you can help change national policy, because the yellow states are 15 states that are single rate. And 7 states have become single rate in the last 5 years alone. The black dot on them shows where the Republican leadership, all Republican states, has committed to going to zero. We've actually pulled the trigger in Mississippi, is phasing to zero on their personal income tax. Louisiana, Kentucky, Wyoming, West Virginia.
There's zero now?
Pardon?
There's zero now, or they're going to zero?
And to get to the Congressman's point about the importance of bringing spending down, the way they're going to zero is they're saying, we used to spend everything that came in, and now we're going to set our spending level. And when revenues poke up above that, the teachers union gets to steal some of it, but the rest of it is going to be permanent reduction in the income tax. So you know roughly how many years. I mean, North Carolina's been, they started first, and they went very gently and slowly. So in 12 years, they've dropped theirs in half. The other states are able to move faster because they've watched North Carolina's success. Iowa, in 5 years, went from a corporate rate of 11 down to 7, and an individual rate of 8.6 down to 3.8. Huge drops. And again, the ones with the black dots are where the governor and the legislature says, we're going to zero as policy, and they've actually made the process. So when somebody says to you, as we saw sadly recently, some Republicans were quoted as saying, we should have a higher marginal tax rate, which hits every small business, right? This is not, the highest individual rate is the pass-through rate that hits so many subchapter S, right? Yeah. So, but there was a group.
Yeah, it's a populist kind of message, right? Like, it's just sock it to them.
But it's monumentally stupid and dishonest.
Yeah.
Because some of the people who call for that, it's not just stupid, it's also dishonest. The smart ones know that the corporate income tax and the pass-through income tax for subchapter S companies is paid not by General Motors. There is no Mr. General Motors. It's paid for by lower wages, and it's paid for by higher prices for consumers and for people's investment in those companies, in their IRAs, their 401ks, their health savings accounts. So, as Reagan pointed out way back when, the corporate income tax should be zero, and the corporate income tax on pass-through should be zero. Why? Because the company doesn't pay the taxes, people do, and the only reason they have a corporate income tax or tax on pass-throughs is to hide who's really paying for it. So they can make it sound like, oh, this is free money, the corporations will pay for it. And any Republican who suggests an increase in taxes on businesses is being doubly problematic. They play right into the Democratic playbook. See, that's free money, we should get that. That you see the effort to take away salt, business salt or corporate salt from the corporate income tax, state and local tax deductibility, there as if it's free money. And some Republicans, Chip Roy, have actually come out and said something this dishonest. Chip Roy's smart enough to know that he's lying. That's okay. It's not stupid. It's just dishonest. And it's a real challenge. There are not that many people like that, but the press goes right to them. It goes right to them and interviews everybody who'll tell them that. So the more voices from the small business community and medium business community on taxing businesses is taxing people, not something else. We need to win that fight. It's very important.
Yeah.
Everything else flows from taking businessmen off the table as some free group you can loot. and it's not supposed to hurt anyone.
Jonathan, I know you had something you wanted to add to that. Jonathan and I were talking in the green room earlier, and I was saying I was getting a little nervous a couple of weeks ago, and it was in part because what Grover was just saying, combined with sort of the uncertainty with the rollout on the tariffs, which kind of seemed, well, I mean, you just look at the stock market, right? I think people were really kind of nervous. I think some of that has settled down, and my sources keep saying they're very close to a lot of good things. But when you see the tariffs coming and then you hear Chip Roy or others saying, okay, and now we're going to just gouge everyone, I'm going, wait a second, what's happened to the ideals that the president was elected on, and how do we deliver on this? Because we had a really good, up until COVID, it was a really good run with all these companies coming back to America to onshore their manufacturing, lower taxes for businesses, lower taxes for individuals. And I'm sorry, you know what? I unfortunately live in Connecticut. I keep saying, we got to move back to New Hampshire, where I was born and raised. Live free or die in New Hampshire. No sales tax, no income tax, no capital gains tax in New Hampshire. I mean, like, it is fantastic. Of course, real estate prices are going up, right? Because everybody's figuring it out. Jonathan, you know, we got to get through this. I think it's so important. By the way, it's important to the Republican and MAGA movement that this happened, because I'll tell you, if this economy is not successful, I think the House goes Democrat. I think they impeach him. I wouldn't be surprised if he's convicted of impeachment. I mean, it'll be all over again, and we're going to be right back at square one. And so the economy is everything. Your take.
Well, absolutely right. And I think we have the pathway to show us exactly how to do it correctly, and that is the 50 laboratories of democracy, the 50 states. We want to be more like Florida and Texas and less like New York and California. I mean, if we were to summarize the 20 years of research that we've done in the Rich States, Poor States report with Art Laffer and Steve Moore, it is exactly that. We have a pathway. Grover's exactly right. We've had these flat tax states, including right here in Georgia being one of those 7 new flat tax states since the pandemic. And by the way, Congresswoman, the right flat tax rate is 0 that Texas has, so you got that right. That is exactly the right rate. But the one thing I was going to mention in addition to that is, you know, DC, the corporate media in DC, and one of the biggest pet peeves of mine is they care more what about Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump have for lunch on a given day than they do what is happening in the states that actually matter. The states that are winning are the states that are keeping spending in check, that are cutting taxes, that are doing the right things to incentivize small businesses. And one of the things that the DC media and the New York media completely forgot about was one of the key elements of the TCJA was the states that base their tax bases on the federal tax base. This gets a little wonky. There's probably a few tax accountants out in the room here. But for the states that have state-level income taxes, they start with the federal tax base. And the TCJA broadened the federal tax base. So for the first time in decades, what we had seen is at the state level, states saw unforeseen revenue coming in just because they linked their tax code to the new, more broad-based federal tax code on TCJA. Now you might ask yourself, what happens if TCJA goes away? It is a world of hurt at the state level at a time when there's all this other uncertainty and there's all this issues of state revenues now flattening out. We're asking for a whole lot of trouble at the state level, in addition, not to mention all the trouble we're talking about federally and for small businesses. But that's one element that falls way below the radar, and I thought it was one of the more key elements of TCJA that did not get talked about nearly enough.
Congresswoman, I am fascinated by Texas. I just think they've done kind of everything right. Florida's another example. What kind of influx of business have you seen as a result of, you know, SALT going away, et cetera? I mean, it seems like it's just boomtown.
So I know the governor was here yesterday saying that he thought Georgia was the #1, you know, state for business. I'd argue it's Texas. And I would argue that because based on our deregulation, based on our business-friendly environment, based on our tax structure, and based on, quite honestly, on our progressive actions to get businesses to come in. I mean, we don't slow down. I was a mayor of one of the top cities in Irving, and it was the fastest growing area in the country is North Texas, because we're having all these businesses come in because of the tax rate. I wanted to go back a little bit on DOGE, talking about regulations and talking about cost. The DOGE effort is phenomenal. I had been talking about deregulation for now 20 plus years. And I said, you're not really going to hear Congress members talking about it. You're not going to hear elected officials talk about it because it's not sexy. You're never going to see that on the headlines until you brought Elon Musk in, right? But the problem is that right now it's sexy and right now we're talking about it, but it's not going to be long sustaining. So we're trying to figure out how to make that automatic. And there's a piece of legislation that I've introduced that basically will tell the agencies. I worked for the first Trump administration. I saw this firsthand at HUD. It was like inside the bowels of the beast, if you would. It's nasty. They will continue to spend and spend and spend, and there's little accountability. So there's a piece of legislation that I just included that for every regulation that's added, you have to identify the cost, because we don't do that. $1.8 trillion of regulatory costs were added in the last 4 years under the Biden administration that businesses are having to spend, making them non-competitive with the rest of the world. So we have to identify the cost, and then two, they have to go through and scrub their regulations to come up with an equal cost. So it has to be budget negative or budget neutral, which would make it automatic. We're not counting on Congress to do it. We're not counting on a DOJ effort to do it. The agencies themselves are having to self-regulate. You can't have any further costs. That's one way to do it. A second way is, while we're having DOJ come in, I guess it's basically codifying the committee that used to be there that Grover was talking about, that says we're going to have third-party audits on our agencies. Because we don't do it now. GAO's office is supposed to do it. They don't. So having those types of bills in place, and when I ran this by Vivek at the time, and Elon Musk, they love the idea, but we have to make this systemic. Because if we're counting on Congress every year to say, oh, this is going to be a priority, the White House is not going to always think it's a priority. But if you make it so that you stop and you limit the growth of the regulations and the cost of them, it's one way of doing it. And if you make sure that you're having these third-party audits, it's another way. So we're trying to think of how do you practically put legislation in that helps. And if you all have ideas, we know what we know, we don't know what we don't know. These are some of the solutions that I think is kind of coming off of what we normally always do. You know, if you look at what you normally do and expect
private markets. This is, I mean, you're talking about stuff that you would expect, right? In a private company, you might bring in a consultant company to say, hey, you know, how do I streamline this? How do I cut costs? You also have accountability vis-a-vis your stock price, right? You know, if you've got bloated costs and you don't have enough revenue, the market's going to punish you pretty instantaneously. You have kind of a perverse incentive structure, I guess, in government, right? Because it's all about what can I get. It doesn't matter if it's,
Let's
know,
go to
going on.
zero-based budgeting. I'm all for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just before coming on, I talked to Marsha Blackburn, wonderful senator from Tennessee, who said, please remind everybody, this is the first bite at the apple. In a month and a half, hopefully, this bill will pass, the tax cut will be made permanent out into infinity, and which will be very good and give us all a lot of the stability we're looking for. But there will be things that everyone in this room said, well, why didn't we fix this problem in the tax code? It's just a small one. And so be thinking about that and make the list, because the president's putting out a statement today and the House and the Senate are both putting out their numbers and ideas. But in a month and a half or so, we will know what made it and what didn't make it getting passed before July 4th, hopefully. But then we start a race on what's in the next bill. And there's two, legally there could be three during the first 2 years. So we can have two more bills. Be thinking about what, as an organization, you want to put your weight behind, because you can get something into that. You can't get 12 things in, but you can get something into the head of the line as we rethink right at the apple number 2 and number 3.
What do you think is most important?
I think if we do get the 15% rate for manufacturing, I think taking everybody to 15% is particularly important on the corporate rate, and taking down, the same point, take down how you treat pastors as well. That's the way to reduce marginal tax rates on a hidden tax. All taxes are problematic, but hidden taxes are the worst kind, because people don't know who to be mad at, and that's where populists get around, and they throw a rock at the back of the head of the people in this room, going, you did it. And
They're the business creators, right?
Yes.
It's big, bad business. What would that mean for your business if you could get it down to 15% permanently?
Oh my God, you're so great. I think what it would do is, obviously outside of just being able to help the community and help our workforce get to that next stage, what I'm trying to do is add automation, right? We really have to be competitive. We could add on to that. But you know, what everyone's so afraid of in terms of automation is that it takes away the low-skilled jobs. And we don't want that. We want high-paying jobs.
Right.
And to be able to do that, we need cash flow. And so that would make us competitive in that front. I could really add on to the workforce and get them really developed and excited. And then we could add on to the technology piece, but it would give us some breathing room. We haven't had breathing room in a long time these past few years. And so for us, we could take a deep breath. I mean, you know, during COVID, my dad and I didn't take a paycheck for 16 weeks. We still had to do that about a year and a half ago, just because manufacturing was so much in the dumps at that time. And so for us, it would be so great. We'd be able to transform manufacturing. We could start going after the bigger fish. We could go after more of those primes, the aerospace and defense, and add on to our technology piece with quality. You know, quality equipment is extremely expensive, so we have to outsource that. So it'd be so nice to be able to bring that back in. We could add to our workforce. But I think the most important part is that it would give us security, and we would be able to know what we're going to get year after year after year.
Mm-hmm. And that's, Jonathan, a big part of it, right? The businesses need and crave some security, some clarity, because you got to plan, you got to know if you can hire, you got to know if you can invest.
No, that's exactly right. And it reminds me back to the days of late 2017 when businesses had that certainty and you saw the lower rates. And what did we see nearly every day was a new announcement from either a big C corporation or small business down the street on Main Street that they were going to give somebody a raise or a bonus that they hadn't been able to give before. And that's the kind of thing that will not only lead to the investment that we're talking about here, but also to those kind of benefits for individuals, because Grover's exactly right. Businesses don't pay taxes at the end of the day. People pay taxes. Yeah. They're just hidden taxes. And any way we can make that a more transparent piece for the American taxpayer, that's going to be a good thing for all of us going forward.
Go ahead.
It's important for businessmen and women to talk with their workers and make sure they understand. Because the left said, oh, this company is paying $1 million less in taxes. They'll take that $1 million and give everybody a pay raise. No, they take that $1 million, invest in something that in machinery or others, computers that make people more productive, and then you can pay people not more 1 year, but every year. If they're 5% more, 10% more productive than they were in the past, which is why you got the increase in productivity from 2017 and the increase in wages across the board, because you got greater productivity. And we have to not leave out that middle step, because the left will say, why didn't all million get paid the next week out? Well, if you'd done that, nothing would have changed in terms of being able to permanently create. We want permanent wage increases as well as permanent tax cuts. And it's very important that we communicate with people that the reason why tax cuts lead to higher wages is it leads to higher productivity. Yeah. Higher productivity leads to higher wages.
Congresswoman, I get a little frustrated sometimes. I mean, to me, I guess I'm partisan, but I never like to think of myself as partisan, because I'm like, hey, JFK cut taxes, right? You want to cut taxes, like, let's talk. But what's happened, at least in modern times and sort of these modern political forces, you have a group of Democrats that really feel that business is bad, right? Business is bad, and it's all about, you know, the 1%, and business represents the 1%, and, you know, what do you do for everybody else? And there's this sense that if you just pour all the money into government, then you can redistribute it among the minions, and everybody will have, you know, 3 squares a day and a picket fence. It really strikes me increasingly as though we're up against a kind of socialist system. And the more, and I do have a few Democrat friends, and some of them seem kind of radicalized lately. I was talking to one recently who used to write for Salon magazine, and it actually frightened me, because I'm like, I think he really believes this. And let's be honest, why do people want to come to the United States of America? For a better opportunity in life, because we represent a meritocracy. And that's what capitalism is. What do you feel like there, just in the halls of Congress? You got AOC, you got the woman, what's her name, from Texas, who's always in the news, Jasmine Crockett, my gosh, right? Where there's this just sense that let's take, and we're gonna then redistribute it to our minions. You're gonna get just enough. I call it Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. Do you feel that? Do you feel that? Like there's just this total divide? Because I would think everybody would want to grow the economy so that we can have success and prosperity. But I'm getting the sense that there's just two very different visions, and it's frightening to me.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you said you feel frustrated sometimes. Welcome to my life. I mean, welcome to being a congressman, where we feel frustrated a lot. And we do see this. But it's amazing. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, but I'm also on small business. And it's amazing how less partisan our small business committee is than Ways and Means. So we can have two very similar hearings. And in Ways and Means, we're fighting the big bad corporations, which I think they make similar to like stormtroopers, right? They have no faces. They're just like these horrible bad corporations. It's a lot more difficult to demonize small businesses, especially when you have owners of them coming in and they have faces. You know who they are in your community. They are right there. They come to your fundraisers. They come to the chamber meetings. They're the ones who are supporting the local baseball teams. It's a lot harder to demonize small businesses. But let's recognize that 90% of all the businesses across the country are small businesses. So that when you attack businesses and you force them to pay these outrageous fees, when you force them to go through these regulations that make it completely non-competitive with the rest of the world, you're hurting small businesses. You're hurting mom and pops. So that's one thing that we do on small businesses. But the second thing is these are job creators. These are the folks that actually make us able to have parents who want to move in a neighborhood, who want to move in a community, who want to move in a new city or state, that respects the job creators. Because they're the ones who actually, that's how you're getting your retirement. That's how you're able to pay for Johnny's laptop computer. That's how you're able to go on a family vacation, able to buy a home. So we should stop demonizing the job creators and start recognizing the fact that there is definitely a place. You need to have respect for that and encourage it. And I think, we talk about the Texas Miracle. That is one of the things that we recognize the fact we want to have more job creators and stop making us non-competitive. Because when we do that, you're not just hurting that corporation, you're hurting all of their employees, you're hurting all of their investors, all of these teachers who've got, retirements that are within those groups, but you're also benefiting our worst enemies across the seas, because they end up filling those spots. They end up taking those jobs. They end up taking that money that should be invested in our country. And I'll tell you, when I was mayor, I was lucky enough to be a mayor of a city that almost 3/4 of our tax base was corporations. That meant that almost 75 cents of our police, our fire, our streets, our sidewalks, our libraries were paid for by these big bad corporations. That's a good thing. And we need to encourage more of that.
Yeah, for sure.
The reason why elected officials don't want to talk about how job creators create jobs is that leaves nothing for them to do. They want everyone to say thank you to them all day. So they want to have a pile of money, and you do Mother May and come and ask for the money nicely, and you give them some money for their campaigns, and then they hand you cash. And if you say, thank you, everything in my life flows from the king, from the government, then you dutifully vote for more government. If, however, you recognize that every time we have lower taxes, less spending, and less regulation, everyone does better, and the role of government, now that the government is this big, is to get smaller and go back to the things that are mentioned once or twice in the Constitution. And there's a fight between the people, the politicians, who literally panic at the idea that a tax cut can create jobs, because then how do they create jobs if not being in the way creates jobs? And they're an aristocracy. This is a European thing. The Europeans figured it out. And you set up lifetime employment for the king and the queen and all the dukes and duchesses and so on. And they live off everybody else's work. And they want the peasants to keep working and sending in money. But they will live off other people's livelihood. But they do need to demonize somebody. And that's the big corporations and the small and medium-sized corporations that are providing all the benefits. And if they threaten them with regulations and taxes and antitrust, that'll shut them up, so they won't complain about us, and they'll let us be the aristocrats. The left will never acknowledge that they play no role in your getting the job. You did it. The employer did it. You showed up for work. You became a serious employee. You did all this stuff for you. If you do everything for yourself, what's the role of who's going to come and tell me how swell I am all day?
It's what I mean. Look, AOC had an opportunity to have Amazon, right, in Queens with good paying jobs, and she turned it down.
And they would have made her look bad because the big corporation was hiring people.
Yeah. I'd love to get your impressions, you guys. Just if we can open, I don't know if we have mic runners or if people just want to stand up and shout out a question, we thought we'd save a little time for all of you because this is obviously a big topic. Yeah, we actually can't see it that well because, believe it or not, these lights are so bright. So I think if the team has some folks with mic runners, we can. Okay, over here somewhere. I hear you.
What do you think in terms of timing, and what from an action standpoint, what can a group like this do to help put more pressure on Congress to get this done?
Okay, so the question is, what can a group like this, what can Job Creators Network do? I mean, I think it's a great question. How does everyone in this room and how do they multiply this to get action in Congress? Jonathan, if you want to tackle that one.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our perspective, one of the great force multipliers I think that we have is we have over 7,000 state legislators across the country. Alec works with thousands of them, and we're very pleased to partner with ATR and with JCN, lots of our allies on this. And one of the handouts that you have on your table in front of you was a QR code here. We're asking all of you to sign on our ALEC action letter calling for the permanent extension of the tax cuts. We have over 400 state legislators already signed the letter. Now we're opening it up to groups and individuals such as you, or if you have friends back home that are serving in their state legislative bodies, that is a great force multiplier. They're out talking to their constituents, to their chambers of commerce, and talking about the benefits at the federal level, but also, as we've been talking about, the huge benefits at the state level and for local economies and for Main Street and small businesses for renewing the tax cuts. So please take advantage of that. We'd love to work with you.
Nicole, I know that you were involved last time around. What else can be done to get more small business owners, on board? Yeah.
So I would use social media. I think that has such a huge power. TikTok is massive, right? Just the algorithm, just talking about it, getting your story out. I know politicians, they love stories. It's a real scenario. It's a real thing. It's a heart piece, and that's what everyone gravitates to. So I think the more that you can lean on social media or talk to Alfredo at the JCN, he helped with my story get out, and I was on some news media as well. But just even going to your associations that you're a part of, just keep knocking on doors. Not really, no one does that, but in the sense of just talking to people and just going on social media and sharing a story. I think it'll get somewhere. It usually does.
Yeah. It's what I was opening with, that JCN does such a great job at the grassroots level of not just the knocking on doors, but getting out the message on social media, and it grows organically. I know from my own experience how successful organic growth can be, and it's just this multiplier effect, and it's really rewarding to see, but it's a whole new way of communicating with people. So I think that's another good way. Any ideas, Grover?
Talk to your kids, talk to your friends. They vote, and you can do a radio talk show, but you can also take every opportunity you can to people that you know and work with, who trust you, your employees. Talk to them.
Yeah.
Talk to your congress members, talk to your elected officials, get in their office, give them your stories. A lot of people come in, and I can't tell you, like 99.999% of the people who come to my office want something. They typically want more funding. Help us identify that we also need to cut spending. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to say something to the Democrats. They're basically paying for a vote, and they're giving the people who come to ask them for something, they're giving them what they want. They need to hear from the other side. And everybody can be critical. Everybody can identify a problem that the government is not solving. Help us with a solution. And a lot of it is, when I talk to businesses that I've known for years, the solution is get the government out of my life. Just stay away. So I would encourage you to have those relationships with your elected officials. They're really important.
I think I saw a question over here. Yes, right here.
Congresswoman, my question is, you talked about maybe not standing with this tax cut because you want more out of it. So how far do you go with that? Because we got to get it done somehow, right? But when you say, okay, we got what we want, I think it's you and Senator Scott maybe in the Senate. Who else is there that we got to move to get this thing done?
So I've actually been working on this tax bill. I've never said that I'm against the tax bill. I want to be clear on that. What I've said is you've got a number of us who are looking at it. It's not just a tax bill. It's not just what we're going to cut in taxes, but it's also what we're going to cut in spending. And I think that is equally as important. So working with our senators and making sure that they identify, there's 28 of us, 26 of us, that were in with the speaker the night that we were going to have a vote on the Senate reconciliation, on the Senate budget package that they brought over. And we wanted some assurances that the $1.5 trillion in cuts were actually going to happen. We have to have, it's unsustainable right now. We talk about Social Security, we talk about Medicaid, we talk about Medicare. If we don't have those cuts, not shaves, not like minor little, if we don't have those cuts, those three programs are going to receive the largest decrease in our nation's history automatically because we're going to continue that spend. We can't do that. The national security issue that is at fault with our spending problem, we don't have a revenue generating problem in the U.S. We have a spending problem, and we talk about it. All of us talk about it in campaigns, but we actually have to vote that way, and it's identifying where those cuts are going to be.
Aren't you one of the few?
I'm the RC budget chair. We've identified them, so it's not like I'm not doing the work.
I just want to say, to plug the Congresswoman for a moment, you're one of the few people that actually has a background, right, in finance or accounting, or at least in small business. I mean, I think that one of the challenges, too, in Congress is that nobody really is sort of entrenched in sort of what it takes to make a business work and really gets that. I mean, it's a lot of theoretical stuff, or a lot of people who like the political limelight, but having people like yourself with a background in small business, I think actually makes a difference, and so we need more of that. But I think I saw another question over here. Yes. It's hard, again, I can't see because the lights are pretty blinding, but I'm going to count on the mic runners if they, okay, there's one back there.
Hi, I appreciate your time, first of all. A really quick question. I spent 5 years in California. I've got somewhat of an observation I think it's very important to make. They have higher taxes out there, and yet they have more crime, more homelessness. The cost of living is significantly higher than states like Texas and Georgia. Taxes are really easy to raise, very hard to bring back down, right? Where is the disconnect? Why are taxes higher in states like California, New York, yet their social services are falling apart, the roads are falling apart? Everything here is cheaper and yet better. Do you mind maybe kind of going into where that disconnect is coming from? Thank you.
Do the comparison between New York and Florida. New York is actually a couple million fewer people than Florida. There are more people in Florida now than in New York. The budget last year, $230 billion state budget in New York, $230 billion. In Florida, half that much, $115 billion. So Florida spends half as much per person and half as much total as New York. Florida has schools every bit as good as New York. They have roads. They have all the things that you would want the government to deal with, and yet New York pays twice as much. Why? They have more government employees. I don't say workers, but employees at least, more government employees. They have, they're better paid. They have higher pay than the private sector does. They have better benefits than the taxpayers do. They have pensions that none of the taxpayers will live to see, and it's almost impossible to fire them. So what you're paying for in New York with twice as much in taxes compared to Florida are not more services, but more government employees who are dependent on the state, and more people on welfare that are dependent on the state. That's what you're buying with the extra money, and no, you shouldn't expect there to be more services. Once they've got their hooks into you, they just take the money and keep raising it. Florida doesn't have an income tax because it doesn't spend as much money. One always hears, well, in Florida they must have wild property taxes or sales taxes or whatever. No, they take and spend half as much. That's how come they don't have an income tax and why they can keep other taxes low. So California, you can do the California with other states. Similarly, what you're paying for is an aristocratic class of people who make more money than you do and work less than you do.
And the problem with that, too, in California is you run into Art Laffer and Michael Offer's problem, the Laffer curve, right? When taxes get too high, We've seen Americans stampede and vote with their feet away from states like California and Illinois and New Jersey and the high-tax states. Year after year, California is losing hundreds of thousands of its taxpayers. And going back to the great Jack Kemp, a great hero to many of us in the pro-growth movement from New York, I mean, he always put it best. The way that you raise sustainable tax revenue and have good public services and things like that is you grow your tax base and have more taxpayers. You don't grow your rate. And that's a huge problem that California has. When you have a rate of 13% and you're next to Arizona with a 2.5% flat tax and Nevada with no income tax, you've got real problems.
Listen, I think we need to send them all back and do an Econ 101 class, because you can map this stuff out, literally map it out. It's a no-brainer. It is wonderful to be here. I'm so excited for everything that JCN is doing. It is so important that this happen, and I love that everybody has so much conviction about it. Grover, Congresswoman Van Duyne, Jonathan, Nicole, thank you so much for your time. Great to meet all of you. Keep up the good stuff. Thanks.